Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, where the rabbis at Congregation Avas Torah each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Chaim Pupko, and I am joined by my dear friends and teammates, Rabbi Daniel Goldberg
Shalom.
And Rabbi Morty Jesus.
Shalom.
To sponsor an upcoming episode, please just reach out to us here at the Shul. All right, let's get this started. Our one pasuk for this week, Parshas Vayigash. The first pasuk of the parsha, Perek Mem Daled 44, pasuk Yud Ches 18. Vayigash elav Yehuda vayomer bi Adoni. Then Yehuda approached him, the person that he did not know was Yosef, and said, "Please, my lord, Yedaber no avdecha davar be'oznei Adoni. Let your servant appeal to my lord. V'al-yichar apcha be'avdecha ki chamocha kiparo. And do not be angry or impatient with your servant, you who are the equal of Paro." This is one of the most dramatic moments in the Torah, this one-on-one confrontation, this clash of the titans. It comes in the middle of the dramatic story of Yosef and his brothers that we find ourselves in. As a kid, I always look forward to this parsha. Like I remember waiting for that moment when Yosef would reveal himself. I don't know. There's something that I always felt the story building up to this parsha, and then Parshas Vayigash is just the closing credits or whatever. But this was my favorite parsha. It's like Parshas Bo. Va'era, it starts the Makos. When I was a little kid, it's like, oh, the Makos are here, right? Oh, it's so interesting. But then it'll leave you at a cliffhanger. You get 7 Makos. But then you have to wait for the last 3 in Parshas Bo. So for me, Parshas Bo was the parsha that we were looking towards, and Vayigash has the same feel for me.
Yeah, the pretentious word for Vayichi is the denouement. It's like the resolution, the coda at the end of the story. But no, Vayigash is the apex. It's the climactic moment for sure.
All right, I want to scratch pretentious, and what I want to do is propose that we have Rabbi Goldberg's word of the week.
Rabbi Goldberg's word of the week. We need a jingle. Da-da-da-da-da, you know.
It's gonna be a very British classical music sounding jingle.
Yeah, I love that.
What was that called? Masterpiece Theater. It'll be like Masterpiece Theater.
Yes.
Rabbi Goldberg's word of the week.
Yeah.
Denouement.
The denouement.
Could I have that in a sentence?
Denouement. Yeah. It is such a dramatic parsha, and it's dramatic because of the narrative obviously coming to a head. It's also the moment where we find Yehuda emerge as the leader of the Jewish people, right? That's the kind of irony of this story, is that it's driven by this anxiety around Yosef becoming a leader, and in many respects, Yosef does become the leader. But at the same time, there is a parallel narrative of how Yehuda emerges as a leader of the Jewish people, as the leader of the Jewish people in a kind of different way. And this is the moment where Yehuda really demonstrates his leadership in the most clear and impactful way. Yehuda says, he reminds Yosef, not knowing that it is Yosef, of the entire narrative up until this point, reflecting great sensitivity towards his father and to what it would mean if Binyamin doesn't return back home. And ultimately, he makes this offer to Yosef, to the viceroy, take me instead of Binyamin. And that is where the whole story cracks open. Yosef breaks, and suddenly everyone is reunited. This first pasuk, so it has this gesture. The parsha takes its name, Vayigash. He draws close, and there's a lot of analysis about what do we make of that gesture? What was implied by it? The Nitziv says something very plain that in retrospect is like obvious, but I hadn't thought of it until now, and it was very clarifying. He says, Vayigash, why does he draw near? Because Yehuda is going to say this monologue, this soliloquy, directly and privately to Yosef. And the words, Yedaberna avdecha davar be'oznei Adoni, how did you translate that? You translated it as...
The translation that I read wasn't very literal. It said, let your servant appeal to my Lord.
Right. So it takes it kind of metaphorically, like to speak to your heart, let's say. But literally, it means into his ear. into the ear of my master. So Vayigash, Yehuda draws close, and he says, I want to tell you something quietly. And the idea that Yehuda says this very dramatic speech privately to Yosef, to the viceroy of Egypt, I think is such a powerful demonstration of the leadership that he is currently taking up. Because one might imagine this speech, if you were putting on the play, as this big, bombastic speech that he makes, and he's demonstrating his leadership in front of his brothers, and I'm going to be the martyr, and but in fact, the idea that he says it quietly, I think, shows such a restraint, and it shows leadership. It's like, I don't need everyone to hear what I'm saying when I describe the stakes, that if we come back, this is going to destroy our father. I don't need them to hear that. Our brothers already feel miserable enough about everything they've put our father through. It shows that he kind of puts it on his own shoulders, and he's not looking for other people either to stop him, to say, no, you shouldn't do that. I'll be the one who's going to stay instead of Binyamin, or stop, if whatever it is, he says, I'm going to do this. I'm not doing this for anyone's approval. I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do. And I'm going to say this, just me and the viceroy of Egypt. So I think that it helps amplify this moment of Yehuda becoming the great leader that he is.
That's beautiful. And in fact, it sharpens actually what I was going to say, because you helped me realize something new, a nuance in this pasuk. There is a fantastic essay by Rabbi Saul Berman on prayer. And you can actually find it in the old black RCA Art Scroll Sidurim. Not the new one. The new ones, the new RCA Sidurim are printed by Koren, but the old ones, the black Art Scroll Sidurim, that was the RCA edition. And Rabbi Saul Berman wrote the introduction to that edition. Something I imagine we probably wouldn't find today in an Art Scroll book. In this essay, he compares 3 instances where it says Vayigash, where somebody approached someone with a petition. First one is Vayigash Avraham, when Avraham approaches Hashem to advocate for Sodom and Amorah. The second is our instance, where Yehuda approaches Yosef. And the third is with Eliyahu, when Eliyahu approaches Hashem. And what Rabbi Berman does, and I encourage everyone to read this essay, it's amazing, is compare and contrast all of those instances and what they teach us about approaching Hashem. He answers questions for each instance. By what right do we approach this person or Hashem? On behalf of whom are we approaching? What quality of the person that we're reaching out to? What quality are we appealing to? And so, just one quick example, he contrasts how Avraham is approaching Hashem with more of a universal message. He's advocating on behalf of entire societies, Sodom and Amorah, as opposed to Yehuda, who has a more particularistic advocacy. He's appealing for his brother and nobody else. And he brings out such beautiful lessons about prayer based on those contrasts. But I realized something else that I was going to talk about, and Rabbi Goldberg sharpened it for me, and that is there's something that the first 2 instances have in common. When Avraham approaches Hashem and Yehuda approaches Yosef, that the person being petitioned allows the person to speak, right? There's a certain permission that's asked. It doesn't say explicitly here that Yosef gave him permission to speak, but the fact that he let him go on clearly suggests that Yosef didn't say, close your mouth, I'm not listening to you, my mind is made up. He was willing to listen. And the same thing for the Ribbono Shel Olam, of course. Even though the Ribbono Shel Olam knew that he would ultimately destroy Sodom and Amorah, he allowed Avraham, he listened to Avraham argue back and forth. And I think that in and of itself, it's a very straightforward observation, but an important one. And that is that in important relationships, we have to listen. And we have to appreciate what it means to listen. To be able to listen, especially to things in which we think we have the answer, or we know we disagree, but creating the space for people to communicate and to make them feel heard is so critical in fostering the relationship, right? Relationships aren't just about agreeing on things and seeing eye to eye. Relationships are about how we're able to dialogue and connect. And you really see it when you're able to listen when you don't agree, when you're able to listen when you're angry, when you're able to listen to someone who you vehemently disagree with. Now, obviously, this is a very broad concept. I'm not talking about listening to every cockamamie thing that every person ever said, or people of deep hatred. But within regular daily life, being able to listen should not be underestimated, because it's demonstrated in the very idea of prayer that is reflected in Vayigash with Yehuda, in Vayigash and Avraham and Eliyahu, which are sources of what we learn about prayer. In the context of prayer, we're being taught how to listen, as if the Kadosh Baruch Hu himself is a daily demonstration of what it means to be able to listen.
It's a fascinating observation. It's great also that you have that gem from the opening of the old school art scroll RCA Siddur. What a gem.
I have to give credit where credit is due. My uncle, Hillel Davis, I heard him give it over as a Dvar Torah at a family simcha, and he pointed out that it was published here, but he heard it from Rabbi Berman in Morashah many years ago. He heard these either classes or Divrei Torah, and so they're very special to him, and that's where I first learned about it.
I wanted to highlight a transition that takes place from the end of last week's Parashah to the beginning of this week's Parashah. At first, the brothers approach Yosef with a great amount of reverence and respect. Even Yehuda himself, at the conclusion of last week's Parashah, the pasuk says, "Vayomer Yehuda, man nomar la'adoni, man nedaber, man netztadak." He's approaching with absolute humility and an understanding that you are the powerful one. We're making a request of you. Please, please, please listen. And then Vayigash elav Yehuda. The Chachamim tell us Vayigash. The word Vayigash connotes a aggressive, more combative type of approaching. He wasn't merely there to have a nice, kind conversation. He had every intention of telling Yosef that if you're not going to allow this petition to go forward, then we're going to have to take some real extreme dramatic action. And the rabbis wonder, if Shimon Schwab points out, what happened? What happened between the end of last week's Parashah and the beginning of this week's Parashah, where Yehuda goes from someone who is trying to have his voice heard in a very kind and humble way to someone who is approaching in battle. And he says, the moment Yehuda takes responsibility for Binyamin, full soul responsibility as the one even willing to exchange himself, is the moment he's endowed with extraordinary strength and courage. As soon as Yehuda realizes that it is me and me alone is going to be the one responsible to save Binyamin, that's the moment that God says, now I am going to unleash the rest of the kochot that you have. And the lesson, he says, is so powerful. Often in life, we ask ourselves, someone does something so admirable. Like just recently in the Torah Center, we had a group of 6 men who took 4 years to finish Masechet Sukkah, 3 nights a week, reviews, writing in their Gemara. Now, many of us look at them and say, there's just no way. My schedule's too demanding. My family life is too demanding. There's just no way I can dedicate 3 nights a week to the study of Torah. But the moment we take that leap, the moment we say, I intend to do this, we are endowed with unbelievable strength. And suddenly, all those hesitations that we have are removed. And we're given these reservoirs of strength to be able to do our Avodat Hashem. And what Yehuda is teaching us is the moment you take that sense of responsibility and you make that commitment, I will accomplish this, Hashem says, I am going to unleash all of the kochot that lie within you. But first, we have to make that commitment, take that leap, show that willingness to do what it is, and then after that, everything else will follow.
Such an important lesson, and so beautifully stated. And I think we see how important that lesson is how we see it reflected in the very first sin, the very first chet. Because not only was it about violating Hashem's one and only commandment not to eat from the Eitz Hadas, but it was Adam's refusal to take responsibility for his action. One wonders what the history of humanity would have been had Adam answered Hashem immediately with chatasi, and tshuva was introduced to the world in that sense. But the fact that he didn't creates this universal lesson that one of our central obligations, not just as Jews, but as people, is to feel a sense of responsibility and accountability. And so anytime we assume that, not only is it a tikkun of the chet of Adam HaRishon, but as Rabbi Kisu said, we're now empowered with things that we may not have even realized we could do.
Either of you had a moment in your careers that is suitable to share on this podcast where you felt, wow, I've been given an achrayus, or I've taken on an achrayus that just feels so daunting, and that you somehow found a way to manage it. You found that reservoir.
I mean, I would say there's many, but most of them I wouldn't feel comfortable sharing, primarily because it'll be like,
But it's Latoelis for our listeners to
I would
hear.
say first and foremost, just assuming the responsibility of the Anglo Torah Center. Just saying, like, we're going to create. Last night, I was at the Tamir wedding, and there were a bunch of guys around the table, most of whom were not necessarily part of the Torah Center. And my brother-in-law, Rabbi Louis, was sitting next to me, and I introduced them. And someone was said, this is so beautiful that you pass the shul at night, and there's so many cars in the parking lot. And Rabbi, is that something you're involved in? And I began to say, involved or not, how come you guys are not part of it? How come you can't answer that question on your own? And 3 out of the 6 people at the table committed to come tonight to my Gemara class in the Anglo Torah Center because they understand, like, let's get involved. And just that, assuming the full financial burden of an organization it's daunting. It's not anything I want to do, but suddenly, like, Hashem sends you the koach to, like, make those calls and the courage to be able to say, no, we're going to expand. Let's hire more rabbis. Let's get more people in the door. So for sure, there are times where you're shaking and saying, like, how am I going to do this? And then Hashem says, like, it's not you anyway, it's me. So here's the kochos, here's the strength, here's the know-how to accomplish what it is that I need you to accomplish. So for sure.
That's amazing. That's such a great question. You really got me thinking, because I can think of certain types of situations. I'm not going to speak to a particular one, but certain types of situations where family is in need of support in one way or another. And the notion of taking control of a situation in a healthy way, stepping up and recognizing when people need a sense of direction and drawing upon my experience to make decisions, to help them make decisions. I don't make decisions for people, but to put ideas out there and to articulate the decisions. I mean, it might seem a little bit trivial, but a family who loses someone, Rachmana litzlan, and they're going to do they don't even know where to do the burial, making that decision. And if they can do the burial in Israel, which flight to take and all the ramifications. So that decision has all sorts of ramifications for the families, maybe financial, for scheduling, people from different communities, and to guide a family, a person really has to take on a certain kind of responsibility that, I'm going to help them. We're going to come to a decision, and the recognition that, it may turn out it wasn't the best decision, but you got to do it.
That's an awesome example, especially because so many times you're wearing all these different hats, and you become a medical, end of life care type of, whether it's being a posek for end of life care or giving them just family advice and helping them through the situation. But from your experience and all the instances in which you've had to be that support and be that reservoir of knowledge, it's inspiring to know that Hashem gives us the reservoirs of strength to properly guide them. That was a great question.
Beautiful.
Am Yisrael.